up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing the Alaska and the Bennington triangles. The Bennington triangle was kind of added on at the end because I felt like the Alaska triangle was lacking a little bit in examples, but you'll see what I mean at the end. So my mom recently called me and told me I needed to watch an episode of this show called the Alaska Triangle on the Travel Channel. And I had seen the show before, but a few of the episodes were like about an airplane or a Sasquatch or something, and that's just not really where my research is at. I didn't realize the scope of the Alaska Triangle until I sat down and not only watched the episode about the fairies, but I watched all of them. I binge watched it, I made time for it, and boy am I glad that I did. Once I watched the episode with the fairies and those type of legends, I became intrigued, and like I said, I needed to watch every episode of both seasons. What a plethora of all different types of information about so many different things that I would have missed out on. So I guess, thank you, Mom, for recommending that show to me. I didn't use the show for my research and instead went to see if I could find anything about the Alaska Triangle in a few of my favorite online source materials. And of course, there was so much for me to go through. Guys, I may not get it all right because I already noticed that there's a lot of confusion on a few points. But for the most part, the things that are up for debate are almost irrelevant for the purposes of this video. And of course, if I get something wrong or otherwise make a mistake, just respectfully correct me and put the right information in the comment section. Don't just tell me that I got it wrong. Let me know why. What is the right information? I am really excited to bring you this video about the Alaska Triangle, and I hope that eventually, and I'm pretty sure that I will, be getting into some individual cases as the video is meant to be somewhat of an overview for right now. Because there's so much research, I'm still going through it, but I wanted to get something out to you guys. So, as most of us already know, there are more than a few cases of people vanishing into thin air and of leaving no trace behind, usually never to be seen or heard from again. However, every once in a while, we come across an actual place where something like random and strange vanishings under mysterious or suspicious circumstances seem to happen way more often than what could even possibly be considered as normal if we were able to measure such a thing that way. Being someone who has focused my entire life and most of my recent career on hauntings and the spirit world, as well as spirituality and the metaphysical, the Alaska Triangle sounded like a weird ripoff of the Bermuda Triangle, but after the work I did on the Bennington Triangle, I should have known better. Now, I know some people out there are going to say that it isn't that odd or abnormal for people to randomly disappear and or go missing in a place not only as large, but also as isolated and as untouched as Alaska is. But that isn't all that we're talking about here. Alaska also seems to have more activity than normal of demons, hauntings, as well as extraterrestrial activity. It isn't just the missing or the vanished, but that seemed like a good enough place as any for me to start. It's true that people, some people anyway, go to places like Alaska to vanish and go off grid. I know if I ever wanted to disappear and never be found, Alaska would be looking pretty good to me. There's so much untouched land and untamed wilderness in that state that it just seems like it would be a very easy thing to do. There are places like the infamous Bermuda Triangle, the aforementioned Bennington Triangle, and the Alaska Triangle all over the world, and from where I'm standing, it seems like there always has been places like this. Just because humanity is only now beginning to uncover the power and mystery in and of such places doesn't mean it wasn't always there to begin with. Alaska is the northernmost state in the United States and is not part of the contiguous United States either. It's a cold and barren, mostly lonely and desolate place, which hasn't even come close to giving up all of her secrets, and that sometimes grabs a hold of people and never again lets them go. So guys, let's jump right in. The Alaska Triangle is sometimes called Alaska's Bermuda Triangle and encompasses a large part of the state. It's said to go from the southeastern region near Juneau and Yakutat and travel all the way up and into and throughout the north by the Barrow Mountain Range, and also covers all around and in Anchorage, which is basically the middle of the state. Within that area are parts of the world that may never have been touched by humanity yet and contain sprawling forests, rocky mountain peaks, and sterile, desolate tundra. It's in that region as well we'll find that both locals and tourists alike go missing at an almost alarming rate, every single year without any explanation or trace, almost as though they simply dissipated into the ether and blew away on the cold wind. These people are disappearing and have been for a very long time at not only an alarming rate, but in almost impossible numbers. Humans don't have the corner of the market for strange activity and vanishing into thin air, though, and planes are also somewhat known to either vanish and never be found or seen again, as well as crash under bizarre and mysterious circumstances, too. Since 1988, somewhere around 16,000 people have vanished in the so-called Alaska Triangle, with that number steadily rising in the last few years. It's an ongoing thing, and we as a society, with all of our fancy technology and massive amounts of scientific equipment, and even with all of the different types of investigations and experimentations we've done to try to get to the bottom of it all, we are not one single step closer to even remotely understanding what's happening out there. That number is only the people who were never seen or heard from again, and doesn't include the ones who were found under bizarre circumstances with no explanations even after the fact as to what could have possibly happened to them. Let's talk about a somewhat high-profile case of someone who vanished under strange and bizarre circumstances in this area that happened in October of 1972. A Cessna 310 aircraft carrying two prominent politicians at the time, House Majority Leader Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich, along with Bush pilot Don Johns and the men's aide Russell Brown, disappeared into nothingness while traveling from Anchorage to Juneau. Because they were such prominent political figures at the time, the search efforts were elaborate and long-lasting, but still in all they were to no avail. The efforts extended into 39 days and over 400 different aircrafts were involved in it, including a very advanced Air Force SR-71, dozens of boats, including 12 lent by the Coast Guard, but they still all came up with nothing. Not a single solitary shred of evidence as to what could have happened, when or why, was ever found or discovered, and eventually the men were simply pronounced dead and were a part of this incredibly bizarre but also incredibly enduring mystery. No one ever found out what happened to any of those four men either, and to this day, it's just one of those things that's an example of what happens to planes and people when they fly or otherwise travel through that specific area of the country. Of course, conspiracy theorists came out of the woodwork, but that happens even when it's not such a high-profile case. People were adamant that the whole thing was orchestrated and then covered up in order to suppress some information or another, and on it goes into crazy conspiracy land. But if I've learned only one thing in the last 3 years since I started researching these types of things, it would be that sometimes, more often than most people want or would like to believe, conspiracy theories aren't so crazy after all, and sometimes end up being true. I am not by any means saying that's the case with this case here, and honestly, I have no way of knowing. I wasn't even born yet, and I'm only hearing about this now as I go through the research to bring it to you all. People who subscribe to the theory said that at the very least, even if it wasn't done on purpose, the disappearance of 4 whole grown men and an entire aircraft, the head of the FBI at the time, Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, knew what really happened and had somehow covered it up. Well, a cover-up from the FBI? That sounds very reasonable to me, actually. Just saying. It's not unlikely or out of the question that higher-up government entities and agents would keep something like that from the public. We see it all the time nowadays, so I can't even imagine what we still don't know that happened way back then. Moving on, though, and to this very day, not a single shred of evidence, not a shard of metal, a nut, a bolt, a body, any body parts have ever been recovered, and it remains a terrifying and haunting mystery that may never be solved. And I always think about the families in these cases. Can you even imagine? I feel like a lot of these mysteries in the Alaska, the Bermuda, and even the Bennington triangles and other places like them around the world aren't ever going to be able to be solved until people open their minds and we as a collective stop fearing the unknown and instead embrace it. If you want to know what's happening that's causing all of this insanity and mystery, then really it depends on who you ask and what you believe in at the end of the day when looking for answers. And even then, no one really knows for sure. Alaska in general, as with so many other parts of this great country and beyond, has been forever associated with evil spirits, little people, demons, and all other sorts of allegedly mythological creatures, beings, and folklore. One entity in particular caught my eye, and it's known by the local Tlingit people as the Kushtaka. It's notorious among the tribe and many of the locals in general, and it's said to be a shape-shifting demonic entity that takes the form of what looks to be a half man, half otter. It's said to lure people, and particularly those who are already lost, to their death and their doom, thereby disappearing them from the world and leaving behind nothing to tell of what happened to them or their whereabouts. Another theory that seems just as plausible comes from American researcher and cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson, and he said that the area comprised of the so-called Alaska Triangle makes up one of the, quote, vile vortices, end quote, which are geological areas around the planet that are oftentimes said to exhibit extreme magnetic, electric, and electromagnetic anomalies as compared to other places that have normal rates of those same exact things, like places not known for people disappearing without a trace at an astronomically high rate. It also has energy vortexes, which some people call ley lines, which scientists theorize are subterranean electromagnetic currents. Obviously, the most famous of the so-called vile vortices is the Bermuda Triangle, but that doesn't mean that's the only place on Earth where all of this crazy stuff combines with all of the geographical and energetic anomalies to create whatever the hell is happening in at least 2 other places that we know of, one of which I'm also talking to you guys about today. The Bennington and Alaska triangles are just as dangerous, and perhaps until recently more so, because at least people knew to stay away from the Bermuda Triangle, or you were taking your own life into your own hands and leaving it up to fate, the universe, the ETs, whatever is causing all of this. Now, I personally have a theory, and I do believe it's more than that because it's something that I channeled, that I was told by spirit. But it directly correlates to the missing phenomenon in the woods, and it has to do with something similar to the so-called New Earth, but I'm going to save that one for another time. I'm just waiting to be able to do videos about things that I've channeled. I'm waiting for questions to come in and things like that. But I feel like some of what's happening in these triangle areas also is happening just randomly, like in our national parks, in the woods, throughout the world, really. I was going to say throughout our nation, but no, it's worldwide. From the Algerian megaliths to the south of Timbuktu, it's said that these places exist, and because we have no clue what's happening, less to explain maybe some of the science, we stand no chance at preventing it or protecting ourselves from it. In Pakistan, there's the Indus Valley, the Devil's Sea near Japan, Hamakulia volcano in Hawaii, both the North and South Poles, and the South Atlantic are all other places with the exact same phenomenon happening, just at a lesser rate, so it's a little bit less noticeable. They're all places of mystery, intrigue, and wonder, and who knows what else. Maybe the natives of the land have it right, and there are ancient spirits at work who are angered and or using ancient magic to stop humanity in our tracks before we destroy or disrespect Mother Earth anymore, at least in those parts of the world. Again, though, guys, I am of a slightly different view, but I'm the least convinced by the science of it all because it doesn't explain, at least as far as what I'm able to comprehend, and maybe I'm just dumb when it comes to that kind of stuff, what is actually happening. I mean, it isn't like they're saying the people in planes and whoever else are being vaporized or that they fell into a hole in the earth. In my opinion, the ley lines thing simply explains what's happening in the atmosphere. I've already rambled quite a bit here, guys, and I hope you will forgive me, but the scientific stuff blows my mind because where I come from, in my mystical and strange little world, it doesn't actually explain anything. Let me try to contain myself, though, maybe till the end, and just keep moving forward here because I know I'm going to hear about the rambling and the confusion that it causes. My humble apologies. There are many famous and well-known places that are also said to lie on vortexes. There's Easter Island, the Great Pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, and most people agree, more so in recent years, that the reason those things were built where they were is actually because of that fact. They were built there because of the vortexes on which they lie. Energy vortexes, no matter how massive or tiny they may seem to be, cause all sorts of strange phenomena. They have a definite effect on human beings' emotional, mental, physical, and even psychic energies, and are said to give us visions, help us to miraculously heal, or at least hold the power to do so. It's also said to affect us not only in those ways, as well as causing us to come to profound realizations about ourselves, humanity in general, or an innumerable amount of other things that we otherwise never would have even thought about, let alone noticed. Let's not forget the massive and major random spurts of creativity that come out of our interactions with these types of places as well. Many people, myself included, believe that when we are at or otherwise come into contact with these specific sorts of energetic vortexes, we can almost instantly and somewhat instinctually come into contact and communication with our own higher selves. There's also the negative side, and where I think the missing people come into play, where they're also known to cause disorientation, confusion, visual, and auditory hallucinations. And they can make electrical devices go totally haywire and start misfiring, behaving in strange ways, or completely shutting down, among other things. There are even theories that some consider to be more out there, with people saying these vortexes lead to alternate realities or dimensions, glitches in the matrix, if you will. I mean, none of it is off the table as far as I'm concerned, at least until we gather more actual facts and tangible evidence of what it is and what it isn't. It can literally be anything, but if you really think about it, wouldn't portals to other realms or gateways to alternate realities and dimensions be a somewhat reasonable explanation for how entire planes, ships, vehicles, and people just seem to vanish off the face of the earth forever in the blink of an eye? It makes perfect sense to me, but as I always say, what the heck do I know, right? Now, there is some interesting evidence that seems to lend credence to the Alaska Triangle being an energy vortex. There are an extremely large amount of magnetic anomalies covering most of the state, and some of them will disrupt a compass to the point of where it's 30 degrees off. Many times, search and rescue personnel will report experiencing auditory hallucinations while in the area, and the most common occurrence of that is hearing something akin to a swarm of angry bees. That's the most often reported hallucination, a swarm of angry bees. Sounds reasonable when everything's covered in snow. They also report a lot of the time feeling unusually disoriented or lightheaded. Could all of that, plus the unusually high spikes of electromagnetic activity that are consistently read in the areas, have anything to do with the disappearances? According to the science end of things, it's not even a fact that vile vortices even actually exist, and they're just a theory, and therefore there's no way of knowing if they affect anything, because there's no way of knowing if they're real, if they actually exist. However, if we're looking a little bit more on the paranormal and or otherworldly side of things, I'm pretty sure the evidence speaks for itself, and there's really no other explanation for why there's such an unusually high amount of random disappearances, most of which the person seems to literally and legitimately disappear into thin air, yet to have gone nowhere at all at the same time. I'll say here too that the theory of vile vortices has been met with a fairly decent amount of skepticism, but I'm here for the paranormal and to discuss what makes the most sense. I don't believe in our science when it comes to these things, because even the best of what and who we have in those fields can't properly understand what we're dealing with here. Our minds simply can't comprehend it because it doesn't go with what we know about reality or gravity or other types of all that good stuff. The physics, does not compute. If you're just even looking at the statistics, Alaska has more missing person reports annually than any other state, and in fact, it's twice the national average. It also has the highest number for the amount of missing people who were never found. Let's just look at 2007 for one example. 2,833 people were reported as missing when at the time the state had a pretty low population, at least when compared to how many people went missing, of 670,000. That means approximately 4 out of every 1,000 people went missing in 2007. That's absolutely insane. But of course, if you ask the local authorities, they will give you an entirely different explanation for all of the people going missing there regularly and consistently. I'll tell you just some of the reasons that they like to give. One of them is the fact that Alaska has an insane amount of wilderness that is extremely desolate and remote. Over half of the entire nation's federally delegated wilderness belongs to Alaska, as it's recognized by the Wilderness Act that was passed in 1964. Guys, that's estimated to be about 57 million acres of land we're talking about here. 57 million acres. It's staggering. And that amount of relatively untouched wilderness is something I can't even wrap my brain around. Can you imagine how much that is? How many acres that is? 57 million. And that's only the protected land. And there's even more of it that isn't delegated as protected, but is still there. It still exists. Most of that land, that 57 million plus acres, is completely untouched by humanity. The landscape is very dangerous, and there are so many things that could cause a person to get lost or die. The wild animals are extremely dangerous. The weather is harsh and unpredictable, not to mention the other geological dangers that are far too many for me to name here. I mean, I understand what they're trying to say, and they have a great point, but in my opinion, that doesn't negate the fact that there's something seriously strange going on out there. Oh, and one of the things that I meant by the geological dangers is the fact that Alaska is the home to somewhere around 100 active volcanoes. That's just one example. So basically what the investigators and other skeptics are saying is that with how much wide open space there is in untouched land, with all of the insane and ferocious wildlife mixed with the treacherous terrain and then adding in other known dangers of Mother Nature herself, plus sometimes a possible human element as well, like, I don't know, serial killers, it's no big mystery why people go missing without a trace and are never seen again. I agree with that one on one hand, because I'm sure a lot of those things or several combinations of them are responsible for some, like a very small amount of the disappearances and deaths. But I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's anywhere near the majority of them. It's like, how many times can you give those things as an excuse? 4 out of every 1,000 people went missing in 2007, like I said. How could you possibly blame the wilderness every single time? A lot of tourists go there to hike, hunt, or camp and have no idea what to expect, and they end up usually completely unprepared. And that's also another big part of it. Many people also believe that the fact that so much of Alaska's wilderness is uncharted territory and untouched land, so it would make sense that should someone accidentally stumble into one of those areas, that no one would ever find them because people either can't or wouldn't even think to go to those places because no one has ever gone there before. The unpredictable weather and freezing cold winters limit when searches are able to be conducted. So even if someone was lost, like if it were a place that would otherwise be easily accessible, but for the inclement weather or freezing temperatures that prohibits SNR from getting to them, they're going to kind of die simply by default because unfortunately, at that particular time, no one is able to get to them. Honestly, guys, what do you all think about these normal reasons people become lost or are otherwise not able to be found? And then add it all in with the supernatural element and then combine that all with the paranormal and other worldly factors. It's literally almost a miracle that anyone is ever found at all when they go missing anywhere near Alaska, let alone in it, let alone in the so-called triangle area. What do you guys think? What makes more sense to you guys so far? There's another theory I thought that I would mention here, and please remember I didn't even come close to covering all of them, but that's a theory that glaciers are swallowing people up. They're deceptively beautiful, and they've even been thought to have swallowed up some of the missing planes and other aircrafts that have seemingly disappeared into the wind as well. The glaciers only appear to be solid ice when in reality they are honeycombed with a bunch of hidden chambers and all sorts of other kinds of crevices and pathways that are said to be larger than some office buildings. Add to all of that the fact that snow is constantly falling in the so-called northern climate of Alaska, and you have a recipe for things being hidden almost as soon as they're lost. In essence, buried underneath snow within minutes or seconds. Some people believe it's a reasonable assumption that vanishing into thin air simply means very quickly got covered in snow. I mean, it's definitely possible, but the answer for the majority of people in planes that have gone missing without a trace, I'm not so sure. What do you guys think? So as I was going through my research, I realized that we've never discussed the Bennington Triangle here on my channel either. And because the Alaska Triangle information was like a little bit more scientific than what I normally like to present to you guys, I decided to tack the Bennington Triangle and some of the infamous disappearances that have happened there right onto the end here. I hope you guys don't mind. It just makes for a longer video. The Bennington Triangle was coined as such by an American author named Joseph A. Citro and is said to describe an area in southwestern Vermont where numerous people, more people than would be considered anywhere near what's ordinary, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. It's said that they disappeared between 1945 and 1950, and that's somewhat true because that's when it seems to have started, or at the very least when people started taking notice. But let's keep it real here, guys, okay? I like to keep it real. These strange and mysterious disappearances are still happening today. And it did not go unnoticed to me that the Native Americans have said for centuries that the area we now call the Bennington Triangle is cursed. I don't really know why, but I do believe that that's more than likely the case, at least for some of it. Again, like with the Alaska Triangle, the Bermuda Triangle, whatever, I don't think it's all one thing. I think a lot of things come together. And I also think that, there's tons of different reasons. And I think a lot of it is supernatural. A lot of it's paranormal. A lot of it's extraterrestrial. And a lot of it's just, it happens. In the interest of keeping this about the cases, though, let's jump in and discuss some of them right now. First up is Paula Weldon, who was a student at Bennington University. This is said to be, quote, the most famous Bennington Triangle mystery, end quote, but I think that's up for debate, though it is really a strange one and shows, I think, more than anything else, that people really do just seem to vanish into thin air in places like this. 18-year-old Paula decided to go for a short hike on December 1st, 1946 on a place called the Long Trail in some fairly dense woods near Glastonbury Mountain. Guys, I'm a Jersey girl. I really haven't traveled that far. When I heard Glastonbury Mountain, it sounded to me like somewhere proper that should be in like England or Scotland or something. But apparently, it's the name of a ghost town in the area that's said to encompass the Bennington Triangle itself. It's not very likely that Paula was planning on being out for very long, as was evidenced by how she was dressed. She was not dressed for the bitter cold temperatures that were coming into the area that night and only had on a bright red light full jacket. So she wasn't wearing a winter coat. She was going out for a very short walk through the woods. It wasn't even a hike. Just, I don't know, maybe to clear her mind, maybe to get some fresh air. Nobody really knows. But it wasn't unusual for her to do that. She was never seen or heard from again. An elderly couple came forward and said that they had been walking several paces behind Paula in the woods, but they reported that when she got up ahead of them and turned a corner, once they got to that same spot and turned that same corner just a minute or two later, there was no sign of Paula anywhere. They did think it was strange at the time too, mainly because of how bright and noticeable her jacket was said to have been, and for the fact that there was absolutely nowhere else she could have gone. There was nothing but woods as far as the eye could see in every direction. Of course, local authorities organized a search party and there was an extensive and intensive search effort, but Paula was never found. Neither was her bright red jacket. There was an offer of a $5,000 reward, but again, no one knows what became of her. There were no clues left behind. There were no leads to follow. And to this day, it's still one big old mystery. Let's move on now to James Tedford. And I know that many of you may be familiar with this one. And if you aren't, then be prepared because it totally blew my mind. In the 1940s, a 56-year-old man named James Tedford, it's sometimes pronounced Tetford, T-E-T, was living a quiet and peaceful life in a small town in Franklin, Vermont, near Fletchertown. James was a war veteran, and his wife's name was Pearl. Pearl was much younger than James at just 28 years old. Pearl and James were said to be a sweet couple, even somewhat unassuming, and they lived an uneventful and normal life. Until World War II came along, and James decided to go off for a second tour. We should note here that when James left for his tour in the military, he and Pearl were getting along great, and by all accounts, they were both looking forward to the day when he would return home, and they can continue on with life as they knew it and move forward. That's exactly what happened, too, when James returned from the war. He and Pearl seemed more in love than ever before, and were happy to have been reunited, and James had been returned in one piece. They were blessed. They were excited. There were no signs at all that would account for what happened next. It seems James Tedford isn't the only one in this story to have disappeared seemingly without a trace. Shortly after returning home from his tour of duty, James walked in his house to find an odd scene. Pearl was nowhere to be found, and she should have been there. She hadn't mentioned she would be going anywhere. She always let James know where she was going and when she would be back. It seems, however, that perhaps Pearl herself wasn't aware she would be going anywhere either, as there was a half-prepared dinner out on the kitchen counters, reasoning that Pearl herself had been in the process of putting it all together and cooking it for the two of them when something interrupted her. because everything else was in order. And despite it being very unlike his wife, James didn't panic at first and just assumed she had stepped out, perhaps having forgotten an ingredient for the dinner she was preparing, or something of that nature, something, she needed to cook the food. It was all really bizarre, but he was just a little confused. He waited for her to return, but she never did. By the time nightfall rolled around and Pearl still hadn't returned, James decided to go and speak to some of his neighbors to see if any of them had seen her that day. More than a few friends and neighbors told James they had seen Pearl at the local Amico station earlier in the afternoon and that she seemed perfectly normal. She was her polite and friendly self to everyone who said they encountered her. She was even said to have been in good spirits and not in the least under any duress at all. The next day, when she still hadn't returned and he hadn't heard from her, James finally notified the police. The authorities immediately went to the Tedford home to investigate and question James, but they could find no trace of Pearl anywhere in the home or on the property, nor did they find anything in the surrounding areas. It was as though she were standing at the kitchen counter preparing a meal for her and her husband and poof, vanished into thin air. The authorities almost immediately started to speculate that perhaps Pearl had run off on James, but that didn't make much sense as she hadn't left a note, and furthermore, why in the world would she leave behind a half-prepared meal? Also, her demeanor that day was described by people who knew her, some who knew her pretty well. It didn't lend credence to her having just got up and run off on her husband and run off on her life. Pearl was never seen or heard from again, and this threw James into a deep depression, as I'm sure a lot of us can imagine and sympathize with. He was almost despondent, and he missed his wife and mourned her tirelessly. He could never understand what could have possibly happened to have made her leave the way she did, and with no evidence left behind either. He would sit and stare at the wall, almost non-blinking for hours on end, and went days without moving out of his chair at all. Eventually, it all became too much for James, and he couldn't stand to be in the house he had once shared with his beloved and missing wife anymore. In 1947, he moved to the Soldiers' Retirement Home in Bennington, Vermont. It's said that while he was there, he made no attempt to make friends and basically kept to himself all of the time. He did have a few relatives left, but they lived about 8 hours away by bus in St. Albans, Vermont. The trip was long and went through a pretty rugged wilderness area throughout Route 7 at the time. James did go and visit them every once in a while for a change of scenery, but he was never able to recover from Pearl's vanishing, and it was like he was a whole different person altogether. He became this kind of bitter, curmudgeonly old man. How terrible to have made it through two such incredibly dangerous, terrifying, and harsh tours of war, especially in those days, only to be personally ruined because of a mysterious tragedy with a mystery that can't be solved involving the love of your life. In December of 1949, these relatives invited James to come and visit for a few days, and he agreed to go. James took the long trip and made it to his destination unharmed and, physically at least, in good health. It was the journey home that would become another one of the mysteries of the so-called Bennington Triangle. It should be said that James Tedford, at least since losing his beloved wife Pearl, was a sour and tempestuous, quiet man, and the passengers who rode in the bus with him that day as he made his way back to the retirement home said that was exactly how he seemed. Nothing was amiss as far as what the authorities could gather when they started investigating how James Tedford, an old veteran on a bus packed with people, could literally evaporate into thin air. Yeah. James never returned back to the retirement home, and his absence was noticed immediately. The staff and some other residents knew when he was expected to be back and grew immediately concerned when he didn't show up because he was nothing if not punctual. The 15 other passengers on the bus that day and the bus driver confirmed he had gotten on the bus and even showed investigators where he was sitting during the long trip back. All of the cash he had on him at the time, his luggage, and all of the rest of his belongings were left stowed away on the bus. The only thing that was missing was James. His belongings being left behind was more confirmation that he had, in fact, boarded the bus in the first place and took a seat. According to multiple witnesses, James was last seen sleeping in his seat on the bus and hadn't gotten off at any of the stops along the way. The bus driver attested to this and said he always took notice of the passengers who got off the bus at the stops, especially when there were only 15 of them on a bus that held many more seats. However, it's also said that aside from his boarding, taking his seat, and then being seen sleeping soundly, James was pretty nondescript, and there was no other reason for anyone to notice him or pay attention to what he was even doing. So would they all have noticed? Would they all have not noticed? I mean, wouldn't someone have seen him get off? Like, oh yeah, that curmudgeonly old guy. I don't know why he left his stuff, but he got off in Topeka. I don't know. I don't even know if Topeka's around there. I don't know. Even still, if he didn't get off the bus at any of the stops, how and when did he get off then? He certainly wasn't able to get off or out of a moving bus without being noticed. It was also snowing very heavily at the time of the trip and disappearance. James Tedford is another person who seems to have been here 1 minute and poof, gone the next. How does a whole person, a grown man who was tough and gruff and made weary by life and war, who kept to himself and greatly missed his beloved wife, who also went missing mysteriously and seemed to vanish into thin air, just disappear himself into thin air while on a crowded bus in front of 16 witnesses? There have been many theories on this one throughout the years, including that he was killed on the bus, but there were all those other passengers plus the driver, and it's highly doubtful every single one of them were in on it and covering up for either each other or one of them. A murderer. Another theory that I believe holds no water is that he never got back on the bus to begin with, and that something unknown and equally as mysterious happened to him before he could do so. But remember, all of his belongings, including his cash, were left on the bus, so it stands to reason that he was in fact on the bus and had boarded himself. It would have been just as suspicious if someone else had boarded with his belongings and left them there, getting on the bus and then disembarking without anyone noticing. I haven't come across a single theory that makes any sense or that's in any way satisfactory as far as what could have happened to this poor old man, other than that he really did just freaking vanish into thin air. Guys, I'm not saying it was aliens, but in 1950, a woman named Frida Langer was camping in some woods near Glastonbury Mountain when she and her cousin, whose name was Herbert, decided to go for a short hike together. By the time they were just a few hundred feet from their campsite, though, Frida fell into a small stream and got her shoes, socks, and pants soaking wet from the water. She asked Herbert if he would wait there for her while she ran back to the camp really quickly, just to put on some dry clothes so that they can continue on their hike. It was no big deal. He agreed to wait for her, and off she went. She had been gone for a really long time. When finally her cousin decided to walk back to the camp, he wanted to check on her himself and make sure that she was okay. However, there was no sign of Frida at all, and there were no sign that she had ever made it back to the camp. So, in broad daylight and within earshot of at least one cousin who was out there with her, Frida Langer disappeared in the blink of an eye and without a trace. Searches were conducted, and while they did eventually find her body, that just compounded the mystery of what happened to her. For one thing, her body was much more decomposed than it should have been for having been out in the cold weather. But even stranger was the fact that it was found lying in the middle of a trail that had been meticulously searched numerous times in the months that they had been scouring the woods and surrounding areas for her. In other words, she wasn't there the whole time. There was no possible way that she was there, and it looked like she had merely appeared there in the blink of an eye just as quickly and strangely as she had disappeared to begin with. This is what has happened in a lot of these so-called smiley face killer or missing 411 cases. Maybe not a ton of them, but there are certain cases that I could probably name offhand if I wanted to, where searchers would search meticulously in one specific area and then bam, the body's suddenly there. And the body's always weird in some way, like too decomposed, not decomposed enough, missing shoes, things like that. Unfortunately, Frida's body was far too decomposed to be able to make a determination as to how she died or anything at all about what happened to her, and the mystery remains. Frida knew the area and the trails very well and had been to that exact same spot, camping and hiking numerous times before the last time she had gone when she had gone missing. It was the middle of the day on top of everything else, and how did her cousin not hear anything, at least hear anything, let alone maybe see something? He was right there. In 1945, a man named Mitty Rivers was leading a hunting party in the woods near the city of Glastonbury. There was a whole group of men in the hunting party, but on the way back to the camp one day, Mitty simply broke off from the others for no known reason. His companions saw him going off on his own, but they didn't think anything of it because he was the one leading them. He didn't say like, hey guys, I see a buck, I'm going this way. He didn't say anything like that. He was a skilled hunter and avid outdoorsman and knew his way around that area particularly better than any single one of them. The rest of the men just went on ahead back to their camp while Rivers went wherever he was going, and they all assumed he would just catch up with them later. He didn't, and he was never seen or heard from again. No one heard anything, no one saw anything, and that's basically the end of the story of Mitty Rivers. The area was searched extensively and thoroughly numerous times, but the only thing that they ever found was a rifle cartridge that was the same kind he used, but it's unknown if it was actually his or if it wasn't. There was no evidence of an animal attack, any sort of predation or foul play, no evidence of any human element, like a serial killer or a murder. He was simply there one moment, gone the next, at least as far as anyone who's familiar with the case or who was there is concerned. His body has never been recovered, and his whereabouts are unknown, though it does stand to reason he would have died at least of old age, natural causes by now anyway. I couldn't find anything else on the case of Mitty Rivers. Nada. On Columbus Day in 1950, a little boy named Paul Jeffson and his mother took a trip in their family vehicle to the local dump. His mother was the caretaker of the dump, and that day she had some minor business to attend to. It wasn't going to take long, and so she took her 8-year-old son, Paul, with her. It stands to reason that she was a stay-at-home mother like most women with kids were back in the 50s, and he might have had the day off school due to the holiday, but that's just speculation on my part. My brain wheels were turning, trying to be like, why would she bring him? Wasn't he in school? Oh yeah, it was Columbus Day, yada, yada, yada. Paul's mother left him in the car so she could do her chores, and she wasn't gone more than a few minutes. She told Paul to stay in the car while she was gone, and he promised he would, and he always did what he was told. He was known to be a very good kid. However, when his mother got back to the car, Paul was gone, and no one ever found out what happened to him. Oddly enough, he was wearing a bright red jacket too, just like Paul Weldon, but still in all, he was never found and no clues or leads were ever uncovered. Canines followed his scent from the vehicle for a few miles leading towards Glastonbury Mountain, but then they lost it somewhere along the way. She was only gone a few minutes. How did an 8-year-old get a few miles up the mountain? Also, it seemed like a very random spot where the scent suddenly dropped to, and it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, which rules out him having gotten in another vehicle and being driven off or something like that. There's nothing else in this case either except an old local legend that says it's bad luck to wear red in that part of the woods near the mountain. The same part of the mountain where 8-year-old Paul and 18-year-old Paula both vanished into thin air while wearing bright red jackets. If I may interject, I will say that red is a very attractive color to almost all species of fey creature. Not trying to make any real connections where there aren't any or anything, but I'm just stating a fact. Red is the most desirable color other than purple to the fey. As I mentioned earlier, there is an old native legend, a few of them actually, that say that the mountain itself and the surrounding woods are all cursed. There's an old Algonquin legend that warns of a malevolent stone that's said to be enchanted that sits somewhere on or near the top of the mountain. Anyone unlucky enough to step on it is said to be devoured by the mountain, as it will open up and swallow that person whole. This was all happening before people were even going missing in the Bennington, Glastonbury area and the surrounding woods. Most tribes in the area avoid the mountain and the woods altogether, maintaining they are cursed. To this day, there are mountaineers, hunters, hikers, and all sorts of outdoors men and women who say there are bizarre wind patterns that are unusually chaotic and confusing. And apparently, and from what I understand with my research, that those things are just some that make the usual markers hunters and others use to stay safe, on course, and oriented non-existent. It completely throws them off. The wind patterns have been described as eerie and are said to be strange enough to be the blame for the area's reputation for being very hard to navigate. However, whether it's something that's just naturally occurring or the result of some sort of ancient curse is impossible to determine for the most part, but it is still highly debated to this day. There's another element to all of this in the form of another legend that existed long before people started vanishing in the so-called Bennington Triangle. Since the mid-1800s, people in the area have been reporting that they've seen a tall, Sasquatch-like creature lurking around in the woods out there. The very first report of the creature came from a stagecoach driver who was passing through an area between Bennington and Glastonbury. A sudden and torrential downpour forced the man to pull the stagecoach over to the side of the road while he waited for the random and strange storm to pass. He and all of his passengers claimed later on that a giant, hairy creature who looked like we would call today a Bigfoot or Sasquatch came stumbling out of the woods, pushed the stagecoach over onto its side, and then went running back into the woods again. In 1943, a man named Carl Herrick went missing when he was in the woods hunting with several other people in his hunting party. They were about 10 miles east of Glastonbury. A search was launched, and Carl was eventually found a few days later. It was determined he had been, quote, squeezed to death, end quote, and his body was surrounded by giant footprints that couldn't have possibly belonged to any human man or human being in general. But they also weren't the footprints of any known animals in the area either, or any known animals at all. In 1892, a sawmill worker named Henry McDowell murdered one of his co-workers at the mill by bashing the man's head in with a large rock. He was apprehended by authorities almost immediately, but he insisted it wasn't his fault because strange and mysterious voices had commanded that he commit the murder on his co-worker. He ended up in Vermont State Asylum. However, he escaped before even coming close to finishing out his sentence when he stowed himself away in a railroad car. It's said that he lived out the rest of his life in the woods in Bennington, and he was never seen or heard from again. The authorities and citizens, of course, searched for him high and low when he escaped, but no evidence was ever found leading either to him or to the knowledge of where he ended up or what happened to him. He would have been very elderly and possibly even infirmed by the time people started disappearing in the woods in the early 1940s. But there are still those people who insist that it could have been Henry and that he somehow lived an extremely and unusually long and healthy life in the woods, that he was able to kidnap people and make it look like they merely vanished, all while being like 90 to 100 years old. I won't spend any more time on this theory because it's just ludicrous to me, but I do think that there's a chance something in the woods recognized something inside of Henry, and maybe it did reach out to him telepathically and tell him that he needed to commit the murder. Then, as we know stranger things have indeed happened, it could have provided him with the shelter and cover he needed in order to live out his life in the woods and not in a mental asylum for the aforementioned murder. It's all speculation though, because nobody actually knows what became of Henry McDowell. No body or remains were ever found, and he certainly wasn't ever located while he was still alive. Just another strange thing that has happened in this area throughout the centuries. Just like with the Alaska Triangle and so many other wooded areas where strange things always seem to happen, the Bennington Triangle is no exception when it comes to reports of UFOs in the sky. Throughout the ages, or so it seems, and right up to our modern day, there have been and still are reports of strange lights in the sky and columnar crafts that resemble flying silos. In 1984, a man named Dom Pratt reported having seen one of the crafts, and he described it as, quote, a flying silo, end quote. Numerous hikers and hunters in the woods near Bennington have come forward and given similar descriptions. Given all of the strange and mysterious disappearances in the 40s and 50s, there are many people who believe that extraterrestrials are responsible for not only those same disappearances, but for most of the bizarre and unexplainable phenomena and other things that seem to happen out there. There's another theory I wanted to mention here before we end too. Before the area was even colonized, there were these ideas that the area was cursed, housed strange creatures unlike anything we know or have since come to discover, and other inexplicable phenomena were rife in this one particular area. This theory was originally posited by John Keel, which is another reason I thought it was at least worth mentioning, as I respect him very much and believe in his work. Well, I did until he passed away, and now he has no more work, which sucks. Keel theorized that in places like the Bennington Triangle, the boundaries between our world and other places and dimensions is unusually thin, which leads to a seemingly disproportionately high number of unexplainable phenomena. He referred to these places as window areas and said that in these types of areas, physical reality is simply less concrete. Window areas is something else I want to talk about going forward when I start doing the metaphysical and spirituality series. Obviously, it's impossible to prove that such things as window areas and vile vortices actually exist, at least for now, but they would simultaneously explain almost every single strange thing that's ever been reported in areas such as the ones in Bennington and Alaska that we refer to as the triangles. Other places too, we've spoken about many throughout this video. It would explain it all, including the seemingly random and always mysterious disappearances, the bizarre creatures, and even why the natives in the area think the places are cursed in general. Please let me know, please, all of your thoughts and theories in the comments below, please. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, if you enjoyed hanging out with each other in the premiere if you were here. Spread the love, please, by sharing this video, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Be sure to hit that like button and leave a comment. In the description box, you will find links for ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, and Patreon. On Wednesday nights, you will find myself and Ghost Dragon ZW right here at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time, going until we have no one else to read for with live Intuitive Oracle. If you think you might be interested in Intuitive Oracle, please come on in and check it out. It's free, or you can leave a donation, but you don't have to. One random card for one random deck. I think that would help bring more of my subscribers into the spiritual and metaphysical stuff I'm going to be doing. I am not going to stop doing this kind of stuff or the stuff that I've been doing weekly, okay? Come on in, hang out. It is the best chat on YouTube. And I'm not just saying that because it's in my channel. If you want to feel accepted like you belong, if you want to feel good about yourself and powerful, come on in, see what it's all about. Every other Thursday, it's myself, Ghost Dragon ZW, and Miss Lara, Paranormal Pixie, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, just chillaxing and chat and hanging out and chilling. Every other Monday, so not on the Monday this is going to be released, but the Monday after at 12 noon Eastern Time, it's Afternoon Talk with myself and Ghost Dragon ZW. Sometimes we'll have a guest, otherwise we'll just hang out. On the same weeks, I know this is very confusing, but it's a new schedule, so you guys, I hope will get used to it. On the same week we do Afternoon Talk on Monday, on Thursday nights it will be just Paranormal Pixie, the Lara Hour, basically, where conversations with Lara, just hang out and ask her your metaphysical and spiritual questions, get to know her a little bit better. She is a beacon of light, an amazing source of all kinds of information. I just love listening to her. Fridays at midnight Eastern Time, Midnight Vibes with Ghost Dragon CW, another live stream. Come on in and check it out. Also in the description box, you will find links for my books. My first book, Missing the Faith Theory. My second book, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories. And my third book, Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis and Beyond, as I work on the fourth book, Danger at Your Doorstep, Encounters with the Black-Eyed Kids. If you become a patron and pledge $20 a month or more, I will send you a personal intuitive oracle reading every single month that you pledge that donation for free as a thank you. Just thank you for being a patron, being patient with me, and being awesome. I definitely appreciate all of the donations. I am working on giving away, doing some kind of contest or giveaway for the third shirt Jive Creations sent me as a gift, kind of to give it away. So I did a little video called Jive Creations. If you guys want to check that out, it's only a few minutes. I think it's like 3.5 minutes. If you want to see the shirt, see what I'm giving away. And I'm also working on some more things too, but you guys have to get more involved. So when I say that I'm doing a writing contest and I'm going to give A, B, and C away, but I don't receive anyone's short stories, then I really can't do anything with it. I told you guys that next time we do an afternoon talk, which won't be when this video is released, but the week after on a Monday, that I wanted to do a Q&A with myself and Ghost Dragons. You can ask me questions about spirit, about what I do, anything you guys want, ask anything. I haven't received any questions yet. So if you guys don't contribute, I mean, it's okay. Totally okay if you guys don't want to, but it's hard for us to move the channel forward and do more fun things in the chat and have more to talk about and discuss if you guys don't participate otherwise. But you know I love you. You are amazing. You are beautiful. If no one told you today, you are smart. You are capable. You deserve the best. You are co-creator of your own reality. I believe in you. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Never accept anything less than others being kind to you. And always make sure to be kind to yourselves. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.